Chapter 4, The F Word. The 10-year-old girl went to bed that night, just like she had every other night, not knowing that something was about to happen that would change her life forever. Sometime in the middle of the night, after being fast asleep, she suddenly woke up, totally confused and in extreme pain. He was on top of her, and she had no idea what was happening. She tried to scream for help, but no sounds came out of her mouth. He finished what he had begun and quietly slipped away, while she slowly cried herself back to sleep. When she awoke the next morning, she couldn't believe what had happened to her, and wasn't sure if anyone else would believe it either. Who would believe that her brother's best friend had raped her? Unsure of what to do, she did nothing except bury the memories of that night deep in her heart, where they remained, until puberty began. Her hormones awoke, her body began to change, and the memories all flooded back to her. Summoning all of her courage, she finally told a teacher, who convinced her to tell her parents, who brought her to a counselor. After just one counseling session, she told everyone that she was fine, and they believed her, but she wasn't fine. As a teenager, she responded to the trauma of her sexual abuse by avoiding relationships with guys. As she got older, especially in college, she became sexually active, sleeping with quite a few guys in an attempt to fill up the holes in her heart. Her untreated wounds eventually resulted in her developing an eating disorder. Later, as a young mother with beautiful children and an amazing husband, she became very unhappy and completely lost her soul. Her life began to spiral out of control. To the outside world, she looked fine, but on the inside, she was dying, in large part because of what had happened to her when she was 10 years old. What changed her life forever was her decision to get help. She started going back to church and receiving the sacraments. She entered counseling and joined a support group. And, with God's grace and a lot of prayer, she found the ability to do what some people might think impossible. She was able to forgive, yes, the F word, the young man who had raped her. She now prays for him and even wishes him well in his life, because she knows that only a very sick individual could have done to her what he did. She actually now has compassion for him. Recently, she became a youth minister, and she's now devoting much of her time to helping troubled teens, because she knows what it's like to be lost and to have a deeply wounded heart. She knows both sides of the issue, how forgiveness can bring freedom and how unforgiveness can keep someone enslaved. She once shared with me a quote that totally changed her life. Resentment or unforgiveness is like taking poison and waiting for the other person to die. I don't believe that any of us really wants a heart full of poison, and that's why we all need the F word. That's right, we all need forgiveness. We all desperately need to be forgiven for the things that we've done wrong, and I've dealt with that in another part of this book. This chapter, however, is about forgiving others, even if the journey, like that of my friend, is a very difficult one. Forgiveness is a tremendous gift from God that He wants all of us to have. Before I describe in some detail what forgiveness is and what it isn't, I want to share with you the story of another hero of mine in the area of forgiveness. He was a sad young man, familiar with loss. His mother died when he was 9 years old, and he lost his older brother 3 years later. His father died when he was 21. As he grew up, though, he held on to his faith, and in so doing, he let God take a hold of him. He always loved God, who became his father, and he even developed a very special relationship with Mary, the mother of Jesus, who became his mother. Both of these relationships helped to fill the emptiness in his heart. Over time, as he grew in wisdom and maturity, he joined the priesthood and became a very strong leader in the church. He became a spiritual father to many, even though he had lost his own earthly father as a very young child. A kind and compassionate man with great people skills, he loved to mingle. At every possible opportunity, he wanted to share God's love with those he encountered. One day, while sharing the message of God's love with a large group of people, another man pulled out a gun and shot him. He was rushed to the hospital, and surgery was performed on his critical injury. It took him a long time to recover, but eventually he did, and he always believed that it was Mary who had saved his life. Around 2.5 years after the assassination attempt, he had the opportunity to meet his would-be assassin. What would he say to the man who tried to kill him? What would you say? The man who was shot was Pope John Paul II, and the man who tried to kill him was Mehmet Ali Agca. Pictures were taken of this famous meeting, giving us images that the world will never forget. The two men spoke privately for 20 minutes, and John Paul II later described the encounter, saying, "What we talked about will have to remain a secret between him and me. I spoke to him as a brother, whom I have pardoned and who has my complete trust." This powerful act of forgiveness prompted a Christian musician to write one of my all-time favorite song lyrics. I saw a man, he was holding the hand that had fired a gun at his heart. It may seem like an impossible task to forgive someone who has committed the horrible act of sexual abuse or someone who's tried to murder you. I suspect that some of you reading this right now have been hurt so deeply that you're not sure if you'll ever be able to forgive whoever wounded and perhaps is still wounding your heart. If you feel that way, know that God loves you and understands your pain. He has suffered with you, and He's patient, and He's kind. Forgiveness is a journey, and for some people, it's a lifelong journey. I want to simply encourage you to begin the journey, since I know firsthand that there's an incredible amount of peace and joy when we reach the destination. If forgiveness is hard for you, perhaps you could start the process by simply asking God, "Please, God, help me to be willing to begin to forgive." If you can even just pray that, I believe that your ability to forgive others will grow from there. Even though forgiveness can be difficult, it's definitely possible. As the angel said to Mary one time, nothing will be impossible for God. And that's the key. With God in our hearts, as we rely on His grace and power within us, forgiveness is not only possible, it's actually necessary for us to become the people that we have been created to be, free from past hurts and free to live an abundant life now and in the future. My role models for forgiveness are not only the two awesome people that I just described to you, but also Jesus, who is actually the inspiration and role model for each of them. I have not been hurt as deeply as some of my friends have, and I certainly have not been hurt as deeply as Jesus was. But I do have my issues with people who've hurt me, and I'm sure that you have yours. I know that forgiveness is often not easy, but I've learned that when forgiveness is hard for me, I simply recall the words that Jesus cried out from the cross, "Father, forgive them, they know not what they do." Those words become my prayer. Uniting myself to Jesus really helps me as I strive to forgive other people. I want to be completely honest with you. Forgiveness does not mean that the painful things that have happened to us were okay, that they were no big deal, or that we have to accept that it was God's will for us to get hurt by other people or by the stuff of life. And I do not believe that we as humans can forgive and forget. I actually hate it when people toss around that phrase, and I consider it a lie straight from hell. When we forgive, it means that we're totally honest about our pain. We admit that it hurt deeply. It is nearly impossible to erase from our minds the powerful memories of when we've been hurt by others. Will Jesus ever forget the wounds He experienced on the cross? Of course not. But He forgave His tormentors even as it was happening. Like Jesus, we can forgive, and in so doing, we can let go of the anger, resentment, and bitterness. To me, it's very powerful that His wounds are now glorified and have become the source of healing for the world. Similarly, our wounds can become the source of healing for others when we allow God to touch and heal them. Who better to help the recovering alcoholic than someone who's been there? On countless retreats that I've attended, someone's personal testimony of healing and forgiveness has given hope to people who are in a similar situation. How cool is that? We can even allow the Lord to transform and heal our painful memories, which you can learn more about in the chapter of this book called The Worst Memory Ever. In order for forgiveness to extend its roots deep into our hearts, we need to remember that forgiveness is a decision, one of the most important decisions we can ever make in our lives. To achieve forgiveness may require taking advantage of all of the spiritual resources at our disposal, including counseling, therapy, spiritual direction, and definitely regular reception of the sacraments of Eucharist and reconciliation. As we pursue forgiveness, though, we need to remember that we are not alone. God can help us, and God will help us if we only ask for his help. The F word can change each one of our lives, and it has the potential to change our world. So pray with me now. Jesus, help us to be people of forgiveness. Help us to be more like you.